Have you ever kept a family secret for decades? I won't ask what, just curious.
I pointed straight into the camera that was shoved a little too close to my face and said, as clearly as I could without my voice cracking, that if you could not show up when it was hard, then do not show up when it is easy. And the second I heard myself say it, I felt that mix of heat and relief that hits right behind your ribs when you finally stop pretending you are fine, because I knew it was not just a post-game moment or a cute quote for someone's social feed. It was a shot across the bow at two people who had been stepping over me for years and somehow still expected a hug and a selfie when the confetti fell. You need to know this was not about one missed game, even though on paper it looks like that. Because if we were tallying it like a scorecard, there were the school play where I had the only speaking role, and they messaged me afterward that they were proud even though they were already home in pajamas. The college senior night where they called on the drive and said the restaurant wait list was too long and they were starving. The big tournament last spring that they almost made, but then did not, because a neighbor needed help moving a couch. And yes, I remember how ridiculous that sounds when you say it out loud, but when you live inside it you just swallow and tell yourself maybe next time, maybe next week, maybe when things calm down. Which they never seem to do when it is my turn. So when this championship came around, the one people talk about all season, the one you grind for when your legs feel like concrete and your chest is burning, and there is no one clapping except that one teammate who always notices, I convinced myself they would come. Because I had given them the schedule early, I had reminded them gently and then not so gently, and my dad said he had already blocked the day, and my mom said she bought a little banner in the team colors and asked if it would be embarrassing if she held it, which was cute and a little corny and exactly the kind of thing I wanted to roll my eyes at while pretending not to smile, and I let myself picture them in the seats like it was already real. I checked the stands in the warm-up, which I know you are not supposed to do because it gets in your head, but habits grow from the places you have been bruised, and what I felt was not anger first. It was that old hollow spot, the one that says of course not. Of course this is the day the car will not start, or the dog will get sick, or the sale at the store will turn into a crisis, and I felt my chest tighten the same way it did when I was a kid waiting by the glass doors after practice as the last coach turned off the lights and said he would stay until my ride showed up, and I said they were on their way even when I was not sure they were. I played like my head was a crowded room and every door slammed at once, which is not what you want in a final, but the body is funny that way. It does what it has rehearsed, and I have rehearsed holding it together more than anything else in my life. Then a switch flipped in the second half when I stopped looking for them and started playing like the only people I owed anything to were the ones on the floor next to me, and when the buzzer went and we had it, when people were yelling and pulling me into a crush of arms and sweat and noise, the media crew waved me over because I had the points and the moment, and I felt this very calm, almost bored part of me stand up and take the microphone. The reporter asked about perseverance and whether I wanted to thank anyone watching at home, and the practice smile tried to crawl onto my face, the one that says everything is fine and we all love each other and family first. But I have learned that pretending is just an expensive loan with interest you never finish paying, so I looked straight into the lens and I said that line, not loud, not mean, just steady, and I felt, in real time, the way a sentence can snap the thread that has been holding the wrong shape together. I did not rant, I did not name names, I did not drag anyone, and maybe that is why it cut the way it did, because anyone who knows us knows, and anyone who does not can fill in their own story, and I am not out here trying to make strangers hate my parents. I am out here trying to make myself stop turning into a polite apology every time they pick convenience over loyalty. After the interview, I hugged my teammates and took a picture with our coach and stayed on the floor longer than I needed to. Not because I wanted to soak in the moment, but because I did not want to walk past the empty seats I had reserved with a text and a hopeful voice, and when I finally did, I caught myself checking again like maybe they had slipped in late. Which is very on brand for the way I have been trained to hope, and all that did was make me mad at myself for still giving them that power on a night that belonged to me. In the locker room I sat with my phone face down, telling myself I would look after the shower, after the pizza, after the team photo, after I had made this night about the people who earned it with me. But curiosity is just another way to say you are tired of guessing, so I flipped it over and the notifications stacked so fast the screen barely caught up. Friends and colleagues and people I had not heard from since high school. Plus an unknown number with a message that made my stomach drop. Before I even opened it, because the preview said they were proud and that they were sorry and could we talk, and that was not the surprise. The surprise was the timestamp. By the time I got out to the bus, my phone looked like it had grown a second screen out of pure stubbornness, because every time I cleared a handful of notifications, another wave stacked on top of them, teammates tagging me in clips. An old coach who used to drive me home after practice sending a long voice note about grit and pride. A couple of people from work who never talk about sports suddenly acting like they had been courtside since kindergarten. And then the familiar names that made my chest pull tight, my mom and my dad in separate threads because they like to send apologies on their own and compare notes later, each one leading with how proud they were and how they watched from home and how the broadcast was beautiful and how the angle made me look taller. Which is such a classic move that I actually laughed, because when you do not have facts you throw in a compliment and hope the person spends 3 minutes thinking about their height instead of thinking about the part where you did not show up. I opened my dad's message first, because he usually goes for logistics and I wanted to see what the story was going to be, and there it was, the familiar trio lined up like traffic cones. Something came up. Work was complicated, and you know how things are. Followed by a promise that the next game would be different, which is hilarious on its face, because there is no next game. There is just the banner we won and the tape on the locker room floor, and the feeling you get when you hit the peak. And look around and realize the people you thought would be standing next to you took a different trail, one that ended at a couch and a remote. My mom's message had more sugar on it and included a heart and a photo of a snack bowl that was supposed to prove they were watching live, but the timestamp at the top betrayed the performance. Because the text had gone out during the third quarter, and I know that because the network graphic was on the screen behind me when I said my line and I checked. Which means they wrote the apology before I said anything and before the final score and before they knew whether I even played well, which tells you exactly what I needed to know, that the apology was a template they keep in the drawer like spare batteries. I left both threads unread even though I had read every word through the lock screen, and I know that is petty, but it was not about punishing them with a little gray status bubble. It was about keeping control of a conversation that has chewed me up for years. So I took a breath and decided the first answer they would get from me would not be private, and I posted a single story with one photo from the team account that had me with the trophy, and the caption thanked everyone who stood and screamed until their voices were gone, everyone who sat through the slow parts and the nerves and the long season, everyone who showed up in person when it would have been easier not to, and that was it, no names, no tags. Just a very clear message about what I value and what I do not, and I pinned it so no one could miss it, which is the kind of surgical move that feels way better than a long paragraph no one reads. The family group chat lit up like a fire alarm with the usual suspects chiming in. My cousin Cal, who always wants to be the press secretary, asking if I meant anyone in particular, because it is better to be clear than vague. Which made me smile because nobody in our family has ever met a vague thing they could not twist in their favor, and then my sister Lily jumping in with that tone she reserves for me where she tries to sound calm, but her words come off like a slap, saying I could have kept it private and I had made the family look cold and I had embarrassed our parents, and was that my goal? And I typed and deleted 3 different drafts because there is a part of me that always needs her to like me even though she rarely does. And then I settled on the only answer that did not require me to swallow my own tongue, which was that I had kept it private for years and I was done donating my silence to other people's comfort. She came back fast with the paragraph about how mom has a lot on her plate and dad is under pressure, and I should be grateful they even watched the broadcast. And in that moment I remembered senior night when she did not make a single plan to be there. Because she had brunch with friends the next day and needed to sleep, and our parents defended it as self-care and called me dramatic, and I felt that ugly rush of anger that makes you want to throw the whole phone. So instead of arguing, I pulled a small lever that I knew would do more than any back and forth, and I changed my contact settings so that any message from the two of them and from Lily would go to a special folder that does not notify me. And I set a quiet auto reply for their numbers that said, I am not discussing last night in private. Anything you have to say can be said where you skipped it. And then I screenshotted the timestamp on my dad's apology and the team's official game clock in the clip of my post-game remark. And I posted them side by side on my personal account with a line that read, for anyone building a story out of air, time keeps receipts, and again I did not use their names. I did not tag a single person, but there are only so many people who could fit that outline. And I watched as the comments filled with variations of "we see you" and "you deserve better," and "I wish I had said this to my own parents," and I could feel the ground shift a little under my feet in a way that made me feel tall without the broadcast angle. The team was loud on the ride home, and I kept my head down because I did not want to be the person who turns a win into a therapy session, but the messages kept coming. A couple from reporters asking if I wanted to elaborate, and one from a woman I used to babysit when I was a teenager who said she remembered me driving her to a spelling bee because her mom forgot. And I realized how many small ways I had tried to fix a pattern that was never mine to fix, which made me tired and clear at the same time. And I texted our media guy and told him I would not be doing any morning shows or follow-ups, that the story was the game and the message was the message, and I left it at that. Which was its own tiny revenge, because nothing annoys a spin doctor like a person who refuses to feed the spin. Later that night, after I finally showered and stretched and tried to eat, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize, and I almost let it go, except something in me said answer. And when I did, I heard a woman take a breath like she was stepping over a line she had drawn for herself a long time ago, and she said my name in a way that felt both familiar and new, and then she said, "This is your Aunt Nora, your dad's sister." And I think it is time you hear a few things I have kept to myself for too long. Aunt Nora did not waste time on small talk or a fake hug of a greeting. She said she had watched the clip, and that she did not clap because clapping felt too simple for what she heard. And then she told me that what I called a hollow spot had lived in her chest too. That my grandparents had a clear favorite, and it was not her. That my dad learned early how to collect praise at the expense of someone else's moment, and that she had stopped attending certain family events, because every time she went home feeling like she had auditioned for affection and lost to whoever told the best story, which landed in me like an anchor because suddenly this did not feel like a one-off or a personal flaw. It felt like a pattern that had been traveling through our house, wearing different clothes and a nicer tone. She told me about the piano recital where she was supposed to play last, and how my dad convinced the organizer to switch the order because he had plans after and did not want to wait. And how their parents congratulated him on being decisive while she packed up the sheet music and pretended it was no big deal. And she told me about the college awards night she skipped because their parents said they were too tired for a long program, and then posted a photo at a friend's place with a plate of ribs. And as she talked, I could feel the shape of my own memories rearranging themselves to make room for hers, because if a person grows up believing that other people's time exists to cushion their comfort, they do not blink when they step on yours. When we hung up, I could hear the team celebration still echoing in the hallway, and I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand, not crying and not numb, but something in between that felt like when a dentist touches a nerve by accident and you are suddenly awake to everything you have been avoiding, and then my texts renewed their attack. The family group chat dinging like a pinball machine with cousins demanding context and a couple of older relatives telling me to take the high road because family matters more than feelings, which is an interesting sentence if you think about it for longer than a second, because who exactly decides where the road runs and whose feelings count as tolls? Mom jumped into the group with a carefully composed message about how proud she was and how unfortunate it was that people were reading negativity into a night that should have been joyful. And she attached a screen grab of the broadcast with a heart and a line about cheering from the couch with snacks and a blanket and the dog. And then Dad came in right behind her with a version that sounded like a press release, saying unforeseen circumstances prevented attendance and that they supported me in spirit, and that any suggestion otherwise was hurtful and untrue, which made me snort, because it is quite a trick to call the truth hurtful as if pain was the same as lies. And then my sister Lily added a message about optics and how public shaming never ends well, and how I should delete the story for the sake of peace. And I watched my thumbs hover over the keyboard, and then I set the phone down because arguing on a family thread is like bailing water with a strainer. Instead, I did something cleaner and much more effective. I messaged the boosters who had organized the season tickets, and I thanked them for doing the heavy lifting all year and asked if the unused seats from my allotment could be released to a little list of people I would always want there. The ones who never asked for credit, but always showed up. The neighbor who kept me fed in college when my meal plan ran out. The retired janitor who still comes to games and remembers my freshman turnovers. The old coach who taught me to breathe when the line for rides turned into a one-person wait for me, and I asked that my family names be removed from any priority list going forward unless they claimed and confirmed in person. Which sounds petty if you have never sat alone in the bleachers pretending your stomach hurts, because that is less embarrassing than saying the seats next to you are empty on purpose. But to me it felt like adjusting a thermostat that had been stuck for years. And I will tell you right now, that was revenge I could live with. Within the hour, a different kind of message found me, not a relative and not a teammate and not a stranger throwing confetti, but a local sports blogger with a habit of digging up receipts, who wrote that while they respected my desire to keep this about the game, they thought I should know that a friend of a friend had posted some casual photos from a backyard get-together that afternoon. Photos that featured two familiar faces holding drinks and laughing, and that the timestamps aligned a little too neatly with tip-off, and while they were not asking for permission to run anything, they wanted me to have it first, which made my skin prickle because it is one thing to feel a pattern, it is another to see it framed in a grid with captions. And I typed back that I would talk, not as a source and not for a quote, but as a person who was done pretending that the couch with a blanket and the dog ever amounted to real support. Before I could hit send, the group chat shifted gears as if a producer had whispered in my parents' ears, because suddenly there was a brand new photo of the two of them at what they called a work function, a name tag just visible, a caption about being pulled into a last-minute meeting that ran long, and a line thanking everyone who understands the demands of modern life, which was bold in a way that would be funny if it had not been so familiar. And family members started chiming in with heart reactions and comments about sacrifice and how proud they were of us all, and I realized with a clear and steady calm that this was not going to be solved by any private call or tearful confession. This would be solved in the same street where it had been created, and if they wanted optics, I would give them a mirror. So I drafted one sentence and scheduled it to post early the next morning when people drink their coffee and scroll before they decide what kind of person they are going to be that day, a line that said, "I have been asked if I will clarify my comment from last night." And the answer is yes, I will clarify this. Presence matters more than performance, and my door opens for presence, and that was it. Nothing else, no names, just a lock clicking in a frame they could not control, and as my thumb hovered over the time picker, a new notification slid across the top of my screen from the blogger again, this time with a single thumbnail image that made my breath catch, because there, right in the middle of a backyard full of paper plates and plastic cups, were my parents smiling with their arms around the hosts, a little banner behind them that read "Congratulations on a new hot tub," and under it, clear as day, was the date and the hour. I stared at that backyard photo until the blue light made my eyes ache, and then I did the least dramatic thing possible, which was to ask for dinner, because I've learned that you do not need fireworks when the truth is loud enough on its own. So I texted both of them in a single thread and said we should talk face to face, and that I would pick the place and pay the check, and within minutes my mom replied with relief you could feel through the screen, and my dad offered a time that sounded decisive in that way he likes to sound when he wants credit for showing up, and I said fine and sent a reservation screenshot, and then I put my phone down and called Aunt Nora, who did not ask why because she already knew. And I asked her to sit at a table across the room and not say a word unless I nodded, and she said she would do it because there is a point where silence is not complicity, it is strategy. At the restaurant they arrived together, which is something they do when they want to present a united front, and I stood to hug them because I refused to become a person who can only fight, and I let them start with the warm-up lines. The how are you, and you look strong, and what a season, and we are so proud, and I let it all wash over me like a commercial you have watched 100 times, and then I told the server I would have water, because I wanted a clear head, and my dad reached for the menu in a way that suggested he might take over ordering, and I placed my hand on the table and said I already know what I want, which was not about food at all, and that was the first moment I saw something flicker in his eyes. Like he sensed he was stepping into a room where he did not control the lights. I did not pull out the photo like a prosecutor in a show. I started with the timestamps, because math is hard to argue with even for people who believe their feelings are facts, and I said that I had seen the messages before the final buzzer, and that I had noticed how the apologies went out while the game was still being played, and that whatever broadcast they claimed to be glued to could not have been very gripping if they were composing identical heartfelt paragraphs during the loudest stretch of the season, and my mom started to say something about multitasking, and I said we could skip the part where we pretend to be astronauts and get to the simple thing, which was where they were and why they posted a photo in business attire with a caption about a work function, while a different photo showed them outside with paper plates and drinks and a banner congratulating someone on a hot tub. And I slid my phone across the table with the backyard image open, face toward them, and I did not say a word. My dad tried to play it down by calling it a quick stop, and my mom tried to shape it into an obligation, and together they built this clumsy tower of explanations that would have been funny if it was not so familiar. And I let them talk until their words ran out, and then I said something I had never said in front of both of them at once, that I was done covering for them. That I would no longer be their polite daughter who took the fall for their choices by pretending they were complicated when they were only selfish, and that from now on if they wanted access to my milestones they would meet 3 conditions, and I held up 3 fingers because sometimes you need to make a list as visible as a stop sign. First, they would confirm attendance in advance and then show up in person without last-minute excuses. Second, they would stop posting curated narratives to the family chat that contradicted reality. And third, they would apologize publicly for the years they made me small, not with an essay, not with a sob story, but with a single sentence that did not try to explain the past, but committed to a different future, and I let the quiet sit there and do what quiet does. My mom blinked hard and said she did not want to be humiliated, and my dad said our family does not air laundry, and I said I had been air-dried for long enough, and that was when he leaned back like he was about to lay down a ruling. And I leaned in and said I have not posted that backyard photo, and I do not want to, because this is not about public revenge, it is about private repair, but if you keep telling a story that is not true, other people will post the proof and I will not stop them. And I tapped the screen lightly where the date showed clear as a bell, and I watched him track the numbers and realized that his timeline had already collapsed. He softened and tried another angle, the promise of a big gesture, a party in my honor, or a trip somewhere, or a donation with my name on a plaque. And I said that a plaque does not clap from the stands, and a trip does not sit through the slow parts, and a party lasts one night, while what I am asking for changes years. And I told them that in 2 weeks I would be speaking at a youth sports fundraiser about why showing up matters more than talking about it, and that I would be telling a story without names, and that I was reserving the front table for the people who had earned the right to be close, my neighbor and my old coach, and Aunt Nora and the janitor who never forgot my name, and I said there would be no extra chairs. And I did not say they were not welcome. I said seats go to those who show up, and I let them hear it however they wanted to hear it. They did not yell, and they did not storm out. They paid the bill because paying the bill is how my dad tells himself he is still the adult in the room, and when they left I exhaled for the first time in what felt like a season, and I texted Aunt Nora a single word. Done, and she came over from her table and hugged me in a way that felt like calm instead of drama, and she asked if I was sure about the fundraiser line, and I said I was past sure. I was finished negotiating with my own needs, and as we stepped onto the sidewalk my phone buzzed again with the blogger's name and a short message that said I will hold the backyard photos until tomorrow noon if you want time to see whether they do the right thing on their own. And I stood there with that small ticking clock in my hand and thought, good, let them choose in the daylight who they really are. The morning after that dinner, before the blogger's clock ran out, I woke up with that calm you get after you finally do the hard conversation and realize your voice did not break and your hands did not shake and the sky did not fall. And I brewed coffee and sat at the table and wrote 2 messages that were going to decide how this ended. One to my parents in the same thread as the dinner invite, short and clear and impossible to misread, telling them I had asked the blogger to hold any photos until noon and that if they wanted to own their mistake without drama, they had a clean lane to do it, and one to the fundraiser organizer confirming my remarks and the seating chart and my plan to dedicate the front row to the people who had shown up when it mattered. And I hit send on both and put the phone face down because letting other people make choices without me micromanaging them was the whole lesson I needed to learn and the last piece of the revenge I wanted to finish. They wrote back separately the way they always do, my mom first with a soft apology that stopped just short of naming anything concrete and a suggestion that maybe we could all move on for the sake of peace. And my dad second with a kind of careful legal tone that promises action while committing to nothing, and neither of those messages belonged to the present tense I had asked for, so I did not respond. And at noon on the dot the blogger posted a modest thread with exactly what we had agreed, no snark and no pile-on prompts, just timestamps and a gentle observation about the way people write their own myths, and the thread did what the truth always does. It did not explode so much as it spread quietly into the places it needed to go. And within an hour my phone started filling again, not with strangers cheering the mess, but with a calmer chorus of people who wrote that they understood, that they had lived it, that they were proud of the way I had put words to a boundary they had never been able to state without feeling cruel, and that is when I knew I had already won, because I had turned what used to be my private ache into a line other people could use to protect their time. 2 evenings later at the fundraiser, I stood backstage listening to the low hum of a room full of families and coaches and kids with nervous energy, and I checked the front table one more time because old habits die loud, and there they were. Not the people who hurt me, but the ones who carried me. My neighbor with a simple cardigan and a grin that always makes me breathe easier. My old coach with the posture of a person who refuses to be bored by goodness. The retired janitor with the same key ring he has carried since before I was tall enough to touch the rim of a trash can, and Aunt Nora with that steady look that says we survived our house and built a new one in the open, and I felt ready in a way that did not require adrenaline. Just honesty dressed in a sentence that had been waiting for years. When I walked out there I did not mention the championship or the viral clip or the backyard photos, because the point was not to turn a fundraiser into a courtroom. The point was to plant a flag in the ground that would not move the next time someone wanted me to rearrange my life around their convenience. So I talked about showing up as a practice rather than a performance. And I told a story about a kid who learned to wait by doors and taught herself not to check the stands, and I said that the first time you decide to stop apologizing for needing what you need it feels like breaking a rule, and the second time it feels like remembering your own name, and the room was quiet in that way that means people are hearing themselves as much as they are hearing you. And then I finished with a line I had written that morning when the world was still gray and honest, that presence is the currency of love and that I will only trade in what is real. Then I did the thing I had promised myself I would do if they kept their public version cleaner than the truth. I announced a small grant with money I had set aside from the season's bonus. A grant in Aunt Nora's name for travel and tickets so that no kid would be left without a person in the stands because someone could not afford the gas or the seat, and I said the grant came with one rule that could not be bent, that it could not be claimed by anyone who had skipped more than they had attended unless they were ready to show up for the rest of the season, and people laughed and clapped in that way that tells you they understand the joke and the edge behind it. And I looked at my table and saw eyes shining with the kind of pride that does not need to be posted to be real. I did not look for my parents, because there was nothing to find. They had decided not to come, which surprised no one and also somehow still surprised me, and on the ride home my phone buzzed with 2 new messages that felt like déjà vu. My mom with a paragraph about pain and perception and private matters. My dad with a request for a meeting to craft a joint statement to put the narrative back in a respectful place, and I sat there in the quiet van with the city sliding past and wrote a single reply in the group thread, a reply that ended what needed to end without burning what did not need to burn, telling them I wished them well, that my life would be shared publicly in the same way with everyone and privately only with people who show up, and that I would not be revisiting the past in private again, and then I archived the thread into a folder I named for receipts I no longer needed to keep. People love a tidy ending, the kind where the apology is perfect and the hug is centered and the camera pulls back on a neat table with everyone laughing, but I have learned that real endings are just decisions followed by practice. So I walked into my apartment and set the trophy on a shelf that used to hold excuses, and I saved my speech as a file I could send to a kid who might need it someday, and I left the door to the future cracked, not wide, not bolted, just cracked at the width of consistent presence, and I went to bed with that steady feeling you only get when you choose yourself without screaming, and if you are looking for some late twist where they rush in at the last second and fix it with a grand gesture, you are going to be disappointed. Because the twist is simpler and maybe even braver. I made the final move before they did, and it worked, and the messages that flooded in afterward from people who understood were not proof that I had destroyed a family. They were proof that I had finally stopped destroying myself to protect the version of family that never showed up.